I felt led to move away from our scripture readings we had this morning and just share with you probably a sermon I probably did more than 20 years ago. I once heard a comedian claim that there were only 10 basic joke patterns in the world, only 10, and that funny stories go around are simply variations of these themes. I don't know whether his number is correct, but I think of all the same punchlines that you've heard over the years. They're similar, even though the details vary. During his lifetime, a Jesuit made an extensive study of literature from many cultures. And what he discovers was that certain story patterns turn up everywhere. The details may be different, but the basic structure or point of the story is the same. Carl Jung uses the term archetypal. An archetype is a perfect example of a type or group to describe such stories. And both men suggest that we need to look very carefully at those places where stories from all over the world coincide. We can be confident that what is being expressed here is important and then a universal truth. One such story comes from a Chinese culture. It seems that a poor old farmer had a single horse, which he depended for everything. The horse pulled the plow, drew the wagon, the old farmer's sole means of transportation. But one day a bee stung the horse and in fright ran off to the mountains. The old farmer went in search of the horse but was not able to find it. He returned home and his neighbors in the village came by and said, "Well, we're really sorry about your bad luck, about losing your horse." The old farmer shrugged and he said, "Well, bad luck, good luck, who's to say?" Well, a week later, his horse came back, accompanied by 12 wild horses it had obviously encountered in the mountains. The old farmer was able to corral all these fine animals, which turned out to be an unexpected windfall. Again, news spread to the village. The neighbors came and said, "Congratulations on your good luck, this unexpected bonanza of fine horses." To which the farmer once again shrugged and said, "Well, good luck, bad luck, who's to say?" The only son of the old farmer decided to make the most of this good fortune. He began to break the wild horses so they could be put to work in the fields and sold. But when he attempted to do this, he was thrown off one of the horses and broke his leg in 3 places. Then word of the accident spread around the village. Neighbors came again saying, "We're so sorry about the bad luck that struck your son when he broke his leg." Again, the old man shrugged and said, "Bad luck, good luck, who's to say?" 2 weeks later, war broke out between the provinces and China. And the army came through, taking every able-bodied male under the age of 50. Because his son was injured, he did not have to go. And it turned out it saved his life, for all the men from the village who had been drafted were killed in battle. See, we can draw 2 basic conclusions from these stories, can't we? First, we humans are in no position to make final judgment on the things that happen to us. A certain event may have had every appearance of evil at the time it occurs, like a valued horse running away or a leg broken. And yet in the mysterious unfolding of life, what seemed to be bad at the time turns out to be the means of unexpected good. Had the horse not run off, the 12 horses would not have come. Had the leg not been broken, the son's life would have been lost. Therefore, the old farmer's reaction each time was profoundly wise. He accepted things that happened and refused to hand down ultimate verdicts on things until they ran their course. He knew what the book of Genesis tries to teach us, that the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is deadly poison for human beings. We did not create this universe, and therefore do not have the capacity to determine the ultimate nature of their realities. What is finally good and evil is literally beyond our infinite abilities. St. Paul wrote that we humans know in part and prophesy in part, that our seeing is always as through a glass darkly. The other conclusion, however, is a very bright and hopeful one. Namely, God is at work for good. The one who created the universe and knows the essence of good and evil is capable of taking what looks for all the world like lead and bringing forth from it astonishing gold. Every day is like going to a circus. Remember how a little car, would drive up into the middle of the ring and look so tiny? Then all of a sudden the doors open up and pop, it seems like 1,000 clowns would jump out of the car. You never thought that all those people could fit in such a tiny vehicle, but somehow they were. This is the way of life. It's the way of life. There's always so much more to any event than we humans can see on the surface. Here's a beautiful image of that knowledge of not knowing that is the essence of faith. We can have confidence in the one who in all things is at work for good at the same time that we do not understand completely how it is going to work out. Do not jump to premature conclusions about things that happen to us in life. If you look at it carefully, it's the same structure of the Chinese story, although the particulars are different. And I'm referring to the letter Paul wrote to Philemon. Now, Philemon, if you look in your Bible, it's between Titus and Hebrews. It's one page. It's only 23 verses, but it's a letter that Paul wrote. The book of Philemon was the only personal letter that Paul included in the New Testament. All his other epistles were addressed to churches, but this one is different. It's very interesting. Years before, Paul had gone to a city named Colossae, and there he had been instrumental in the conversion of one of its leading citizens, a man named Philemon. Through Paul, the risen Christ had done for another what he had done for Paul on the road to Damascus. Like so many people of that era, Philemon was a slave owner. It's estimated at the time that Paul lived, there were 60 million slaves in the Roman Empire. 60 million. And one of Philemon's slaves was a young man named Onesimus. Onesimus. It seemed that one day he did a very dangerous and risky thing. He stole money from his master and he fled into the night. As a runaway slave, he headed for Rome to try and lose himself among the crowds. We have no details on how Onesimus happened to cross paths with the owner's friend, the Apostle Paul. By this time, the great missionary was under arrest and being held in prison. Paul was in prison in Rome. It could be that Onesimus had been arrested also and was thrown into the same prison. We don't know. By unusual expectations, Paul would not have taken notice of one like Onesimus, for in those days, slaves were hardly regarded as human beings. Would Paul recognize Onesimus and discovered him to be both a thief and a fugitive, he could easily have responded to him in anger and condemnation. Long before, however, Paul had begun to model his life after the pattern of Jesus of Nazareth. This is the one who loved each one he met as if there were no other in the world to love, and who loved all the same. He loved all the same. This is the way Paul had learned to live his life as well, which means there was no unimportant and no insignificant individuals to him. What the risen Christ had done through Paul for Philemon, he did for Onesimus as well. The young slave experienced a powerful conversion. As a result, became a different person. The name Onesimus literally means useful. And in the letter, you ought to read it sometime. In the letter, Paul would subsequently write, and he makes a play on this fact, which suggests the impact Christ always makes on a person when he's allowed to come into their life. Paul said, Onesimus used to be only useful in name, but now he is useful by nature. Jesus Christ is a way of taking chaotic and disorganized lives and bringing them to effective and creative focus. Old life for new. This is how the Christian way is often described. Old life for new. And so it was that Onesimus and Paul became very close to each other. And the young slave became a great help to Paul during his experience in prison. And yet, for all the miracle of change that grace had brought to Onesimus, Paul knew quite well the past could not be forgotten or avoided forever. Christianity does not invite us to take off the past like a coat and simply toss it aside without thought. Authentic Christian experience enables us to face our past, to make sound amends for it, and to proceed to live our lives in new directions. The day came when Paul said words to Onesimus that must have struck terror in his young heart. You have to go back, he said, you have to go back and submit yourself to Philemon. Ask for his forgiveness and make amends for all you did. I say these words brought terror to Onesimus' heart because runaway slaves in that day were treated with swift harshness. In fact, the practice of crucifixion was invented by the Romans to keep would-be revolutionaries and runaway slaves in their place. Understandably, Onesimus could well have argued with Paul that he really must not care about him or ask him to risk such a terrible fate. Paul said, no, this is what you have to do. You're never free for the future until you have honestly and openly faced up to the past. Since he could not go with him, Paul did the next best thing. He wrote a letter to his friend Philemon, in which he asked a generous man to do an absolutely revolutionary thing. That was to look on this one who was returning, not as a thief, but as a human being for whom Christ had died and for whom he had done a saving work. Paul tells how Onesimus has become part of his own heart and asks Philemon to step out of the culture in which he has lived all his life and to look at the situation from an entirely different vantage point, the way Jesus would look at it. This is the appeal that Paul makes to his friend Philemon and the chance he asks Onesimus to take. There was high risk on all sides of this drama, and yet the way it unfolded is exactly like the example story from the Chinese lore. This God of ours, who is in all things is at work, did with the Onesimus story what he had done again and again throughout history. You see, this is a lovely sequel to the letter in the New Testament. Obviously, Philemon did rise to heights and did what Paul requested, or this letter certainly would not have survived. The tradition has not only treated Onesimus as a brother in Christ, but he set him free and sent him back to the imprisoned apostle, who had said so clearly that he was useful to him and he would like to have kept him by his side. Onesimus became one of Paul's most trusted and valued associates. The reason believing this is that 50 years after this letter was written, 50 years, the bishop of Antioch, named Ignatius, wrote a letter to the bishop of Ephesus. It's a letter that still exists. Do you know the name of that bishop? None other than Onesimus. Onesimus was a common name at that time, but in the Orthodox tradition is believed to be our Onesimus. There is every reason to think that the slave who once stole money and fled into the night with no higher purpose than to lose himself among the people of Rome, eventually by the grace of Christ and the mercy of lots of people, became one of the bishops of the early church. The horse runs away and the people say, "We're sorry for your bad luck." The old man is wise enough to say, "Bad luck, good luck, who's to know?" The slave runs away and eventually comes back, not with just 12 horses, but with all kinds of potential to do good in the world. But that's not all. Another tradition is that Paul's letters were first collected and circulated by the church in Ephesus. It was first recognized here that the epistles had lasting and universal value in Ephesus. And this is how they eventually became part of our New Testament. And who do you suppose is most responsible for collecting and distributing these letters? Most biblical scholars attribute this to the work of the bishop of that place, a man named Onesimus. And this would explain why amid all the letters that are addressed to churches, there would be included one personal letter. All the epistles, but there's one personal letter. It was as if Onesimus was saying, let me tell you how I came to be. From one who had done an evil, here's what the forgiving grace of Jesus Christ can yet do. Had it not been for Onesimus, we might not have the letters of Paul in our New Testament. If he had not run away, he would never have met Paul. And if Paul had not seen him as a brother and not as a slave, he would have never been converted. If he had not gone back to face his owner, he would never have really been free. As the old farmer said, good luck, bad luck, who's to say? I'm inspired by both of these stories to believe that the same pattern is also at work in my story and your story. Friends, we do not know enough to pass final judgment on the things that are happening to us. We do not have the capacity to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That food is beyond us. Therefore, the wisdom of the old farmer who dared to say in every situation, good luck, bad luck, who's to say, is the proper stance for every one of us. For all we do not know, here is what we do know. In all things, the seemingly good and seemingly bad, God is at work for good. Life is like a circus every day. It's like little cars that appear tiny, yet out of emerge 1,000 clowns. It's too early to come to a conclusion about any event. But it's not too early to live in hope, to live in faith, and to live in confident openness. Our God is a mystery to be sure, but count on it. He means us good in all things and is at work to bring it to pass. Therefore, bet your life on it. Stake your whole future on it. He loves us, and he means us good. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.